Well, the meta broke me. I put Swampert back on the team. Take note of my starting elo because we are going to end the video 120 points higher from where we began, and I can tell you guys it's all thanks to Swampert. Now I know my ranking at the beginning of this video is a lot lower from where I left off yesterday, and that's because I went on a little bit of a lose streak. I was trying a bunch of different teams and nothing was working. In fact, the video you are seeing in the background right now is where I finally cracked and I was like, I am sick and tired of seeing double poison or double ground, or I even ran into one person running double electric and they kind of destroyed me because I was running for alligator. But I ran into so many teams that absolutely disrespected Swampert, and at that point I was like, you know what? I'm gonna be that person who's going to ruin everyone's fun. I'm putting Swampert back on the team and we're going to get wins with it. And I got wins with it. It worked. I got 4 positive sets in a row with Swampert, and I can't say we went positive because we just regained all the points we lost. So I basically was able to get back to the elo that I was at yesterday. But Swampert went on an absolute rampage, especially against the poison types. I was so happy with how it performed, and I'm going to share with you guys the games today. Now the team I built around it is Clefable lead, with Shadow for Alligator on the safe swap, of course, to draw out any grass types, and Swampert as a closer. This team is kind of inspired by Jamie Pogo's Golurk team, but in place of Golurk, I put Swampert. This team is entirely weak to Venusaur, so if you see one of those, there was a button created especially for us. It's at the top left of the screen. You can go ahead and tap it, and it will let you exit your battle, and the Venusaur will disappear and all your problems will be solved. But any other lost lead, you just swap immediately into your Shadow for Alligator, even if the lead is Tentacruel and for Alligator isn't necessarily an answer to Tentacruel, still swap into it. You might draw out a water counter, and with the water counter out of the way, your Swampert will be able to sweep. This team gets a terrible rating on PvPoke, but I don't care because it was doing what I needed it to do against the Pokemon that I was seeing in the Ultra League. I'm not going to explain any further, let's just get into the battles. In this first match, we were up against a Talonflame lead, which is terrible for our Clefable, so I swap immediately into my Shadow for Alligator and we draw out a Greninja. Now Greninja technically walls for Alligator, but because of how squishy it is, it can't take 2 Hydro Cannons, so we managed to take a shield from our opponent. And of course they're going to win lead. I bring Clefable in now. I have to take a Hydro Cannon, but in order for me not to take another one, I have to throw that Swift. My opponent brings that Talonflame back in, and I swap immediately into my Swampert, and I start building up a ton of energy. They're staying in, which means their final Pokemon might be weak to Swampert. It's going to be a Cobalion. They have no shields left. I'm going to be able to land an Earthquake, get them into the red and into a range where I can farm them down, and I will have a Hydro Cannon ready for this Talonflame, but I'm going to throw on good timing, so we do 2 more mud shots, go for the Hydro Cannon. It's enough to take the Talonflame out, and we take that first win. Moving on to the next battle, we're going to be up against a Feraligatr on the lead. Now my plan usually is to chip this and then swap into my own Feraligatr. However, my opponent is going to throw a Hydro Cannon and then swap into Drapion. So I'm going to bring in Swampert, and my biggest fear now is that they have another poison type in the back, and that second poison type could either be a Skuntank or a Tentacruel, which my Feraligatr is going to struggle against. Especially against Skuntank, it will be able to hit with Trailblaze for super effective, and against Tentacruel, all of our Feraligatr's charged moves are going to be resisted. So, keeping that in mind, but I am going to let my Swampert go here. At least I was able to take 2 shields from my opponent, so I should be in a good position if my opponent's final Pokemon is going to be that Tentacruel. I'm going to go ahead and shield the crunch here. Hopefully I don't get a defense drop, but we get it, and I swap immediately into my Clefable when they bring their Feraligatr in and go for the Moonblast that I had stored. It looks like I was correct. My opponent's final Pokemon is going to be a Tentacruel. At least I'm able to reach 2 Swifts on the Tentacruel, and we can chip it a pretty decent amount of chip, I would say. But now I think I'm going to need 2 or 3 Hydro Cannons. It might be just 2. Yep, we go for that first Hydro Cannon. It gets them into the red, and the second one should be enough to take them out, and we should be in a good position here because we have a shield left, so our opponent goes ahead and top lefts. In the next battle, we are going to be in a Clefable mirror match, which I absolutely hate. As long as they don't have Meteor Mash, we should be in a good position. It looks like I won CMP and I was able to throw my Moonblast first, and we got an attack drop on their Clefable, which is really good for us, but then our opponent swaps into a Shadow for Alligator. So I go for a Swift before swapping out into my own Shadow for Alligator. That way I only need one Hydro Cannon to take this thing out with the Shadow Claw damage. But it looks like they're going to be running Crunch, so they are going to be able to take this switch. I'm okay with letting my Feraligatr go. I'm going to come in with Swampert and start farming up energy. That way I should be able to reach a Hydro Cannon before my opponent can reach a move on their Clefable. Now, I thought this might be a Moonblast, so I went ahead and shielded, but it was a Swift bait. And my opponent is going to double shield their Clefable up against our Swampert. So this is telling me whatever they have in the back, they do not want Swampert aligned to it. So I went ahead and double shielded my Swampert as well. But now I am going to be able to farm this Clefable down because they were going for Swifts. Their final Pokemon is going to be a Talonflame, which is not what I expected, but I'm going to have two Hydro Cannons ready to go for the Talonflame. We're able to land both of them before they can incinerate us down, and we take that win. On to the next battle, we get an amazing lead of Shadow Dragonite into our Clefable, and my opponent safe swaps into a Feraligatr. I noticed a lot of people running Shadow Dragonite lead were safe swapping into Feraligatr, and the way I like to play this out is I will chip them with a Swift, and then I'll swap into my own Feraligatr. That way, one Hydro Cannon with Shadow Claw damage will be enough to take them out. I explained this before, but in this case, my opponent does make it to another Hydro Cannon, and I decide to invest both shields into my Feraligatr because I really want to maintain switch. Now my opponent brings their Dragonite back in and they let the Ice Beam go. It one-shots, and my opponent's final Pokemon is going to be a Clefable of their own. They have two shields left, so this could get a little bit tricky, but they let the first Hydro Cannon land. We're able to survive their Moonblast and make it to another Hydro Cannon, and finally we get a shield out of them. Now I am going to let Swampert go, and it looks like they're running Meteor Mash, which is going to be terrible for my Clefable, but I think I just need to land one Swift on this Clefable to take it out, but I'm gonna need to reach two. One to take their final shield, and the second should KO. However, we end up CMP tying, and I lose CMP. So sometimes a higher attack is very beneficial. However, I have energy on my Feraligatr. I'm able to reach a Hydro Cannon, and we still take that win. GG's to our opponent. And that is going to be a 4-1 in the first set that we play with this team, and the only loss we got was because we were trying a different team. Now from the next two sets, I'm just going to pick my favorite battles because I don't want to cover them all. We go 3-2 twice, and then I'm also going to cover the final set, which was a 4-1. In this next match, we're going to be up against a Cobalion, which is a pretty decent lead for Clefable. I'm able to land the first Moonblast, and I'm going to let this go. Hopefully they're not running Iron Head. Most likely they are going to be running that Stone Edge. No one really runs it with Iron Head. But my opponent lets me reach the second Moonblast before they throw another Stone Edge. So now my Clefable is still pretty healthy, and they bring in a Skuntank. I immediately swap into my Feraligatr because I don't want them to farm me down. And I let the Trailblaze go, thinking that my opponent might be double weak to Swampert in the back. I end up being wrong, but I saved two shields for Swampert anyways. I'm going to have to shield this Trailblaze because it will one-shot, and my opponent's final Pokemon is going to be a Drifblim. I'm going to go for a Hydro Cannon here. We have a lot of energy built up on the Swampert, so I'm able to go for two, but I am going to have to go for one more Hydro Cannon because we're not going to be able to farm them down with Mud Shots. I successfully shield a Shadow Ball here. I kind of need the Swampert for the Skuntank that's still alive, but we managed to take our opponent's final shield, and I think they tried to catch a Hydro Cannon there, but they swap into Skuntank. I'm able to farm up to two Hydro Cannons and have one ready for their Drifblim. We're able to take their Drifblim out and their Skuntank, and we take that win. GG's to our opponent. Moving on to the next battle, we're going to see an amazing lead of Shadow Dragonite. My opponent safe swaps into that Feraligatr. As I told you guys before, a lot of people running Shadow Dragonite were safe swapping into Feraligatr. Of course, going to chip them with that Swift, and then I swap into my own Feraligatr, going for a Hydro Cannon. We get them into farm down range, and I can probably take 2 Hydro Cannons now and survive, so I'm going to let both of them go. I should be able to farm them down before they can take us out. Now, expecting that Dragonite to come back in, and hopefully it's not running Hurricane, but I am going to bring Clefable into it, and my opponent's final Pokemon is going to be a Golurk. Okay, we have 2 shields left for our Swampert, so hopefully we can outpace to the Hydro Cannons before my opponent can reach 3 Shadow Punches. But I am going to be able to go for a second Hydro Cannon here, take my opponent's final shield, and we reach that 3rd Hydro Cannon. This is going to be enough to KO, and we can swap Clefable into Dragonite. And my opponent is going to go ahead and top left. GG's to the opponent. Okay, this next match is pretty good because we're going to see a Core Breaker on the lead. We are up against a Shadow Abomasnow, and if I had Meteor Mash, I could destroy this, but I'm going to build up to the Moonblast and bait with a Swift. We take an Energy Ball, which really hurts my Clefable. It gets us into the yellow, but I am able to take a shield from them, and then my opponent catches the Moonblast on their Hippowdon. Okay, I'm going to bring Feraligatr into this because Feraligatr should easily take the switch for us. I'm going to go for a Hydro Cannon and take Hippowdon out, and I was really hoping that my opponent would bring Abomasnow back into Feraligatr because we are going to be resisting the Ice-type moves from Abomasnow. They have to build up to the Energy Ball, and that means they would have to take a Hydro Cannon from our Feraligatr. But they bring in a Malamar. I go ahead and shield the Superpower, and thankfully they swap into Abomasnow here, take a Hydro Cannon, and that puts them into the yellow, and now I can bring in my Swampert, and I just have to go for 1 Hydro Cannon to take this Abomasnow out. We take their final shield. I'm going to go ahead and shield this next move, and I think I should be able to outpace to the Hydro Cannon, but they go ahead and catch the Hydro Cannon on Malamar, but I undercharge it just enough to get enough Mudshots in that I am going to have a Hydro Cannon ready to go for their Abomasnow, and this should be enough to take the Abomasnow out, and we take that win. GG's to our opponent. Okay, this next match I included because we can learn a very valuable lesson from this match. We're up against a Shadow Feraligatr on the lead, which is not great for Clefable, but I'm going to stay in, and I should have just chipped it and then swapped into my Feraligatr because I have to draw out what the backline is going to be weak to. Now, the backline isn't just weak to grass types, it's also not going to perform the best against dragon types. I stay in here with Clefable and I let Clefable go, which was a huge mistake because I'm running an ABB line, and when you run an ABB line, you have to swap into one of your Bs to draw out the counter for your backline. I don't do this. They have a Guzzlord in the back. Clefable would have been amazing against this, and my Feraligatr also doesn't have a lot of health to deal with this. I go for an Ice Beam here. I should take their final shield, but an Earthquake from Swampert is not going to be enough to take this Guzzlord out. I'm going to let whatever this is go. It's the Brutal Swing, and we make it to that Earthquake. They're going to live with a little bit of health, and I have to land a Hydro Cannon to take them out. So I go ahead and I shield my Swampert. We're going to be able to reach that Hydro Cannon, take them out, and then you'll see what they had in the back. If I just had a little more health on Swampert, I would have been able to take this Nidoqueen out, but unfortunately, we end up losing this game because they had that Guzzlord in the back, and the 2 Pokemon that I had left, they don't really perform the best against Guzzlord, so GG's to our opponent. Moving on to the next battle, we're going to be up against a Shadow Drapion on the lead, and I have no idea if this is running Sludge Bomb, so I swap into Feraligatr and we draw a Virizion out. Okay, I'm going to go for Ice Beam here. At least the Virizion is not going to be up against my Swampert. They are going to have to go for another move here, otherwise I was going to reach a Hydro Cannon, and they don't want to invest a shield. So we're going to come in with Clefable and farm them down, and if they have Aqua Tail and Crunch on their Drapion, then Clefable can kind of handle Drapion. But my opponent's final Pokemon is going to be a Registeel, so I'm going to go ahead and double shield my Swampert up against this Registeel because Focus Blast is going to hurt more than Crunch. Okay, it looks like my opponent is in farm down range now, so I'm not expecting them to stay in with Registeel. They swap into Drapion, but I still have so much energy built up on my Swampert. They have 2 shields left. I should be able to reach 2 Hydro Cannons, take both of their shields, and my opponent is going to go for an Aqua Tail here. So they have Aqua Tail and Crunch, which is good news for my Clefable. That means I am going to be able to take this out with a Moonblast, but they swap into Registeel. This is fine. I'm going to go for a Moonblast up against Registeel just in case they live that swift, just in case. And I should be able to reach a Moonblast up against the Drapion anyways. It is going to be enough to KO, and we take that win. Moving on to the next battle, we're going to be up against a Licky on the lead, and this should be a good match for Clefable. You will be able to take this Licky out with 2 Moonblasts, along with the Fairy Wind damage, of course. We are going to let this Shadow Ball go. Usually they are running Shadow Ball, but I've noticed a few people running Earthquake. Either way, it's not going to hurt that much because Licky's damage is pretty disappointing, which is why I stopped running it. We go for another Moonblast here, and our opponent lets it go. We're able to farm them down, and then they are going to bring in a Feraligatr. Now, I probably should have swapped at one point out of Clefable to draw out whatever my backline is going to be weak to, because they have a Pangoro in the back. At least my Feraligatr wasn't switch-locked into the Pangoro, because Pangoro is going to be resisting the Shadow Claws from Feraligatr. Also, I didn't feel like on the lead I could really swap into my safe swap, which is that Feraligatr, because those Shadow Claws, again, are going to be very resisted. So I stayed in with Clefable, and hopefully my Feraligatr is going to be able to take this win for us. They are in the red with Pangoro. I'm going to go ahead and shield the Night Slash. I have 1 shield left, but my opponent has 2 shields left. So we managed to get 1 shield from them with this Hydro Cannon. I'm ahead by energy. I should be able to reach 2 more Hydro Cannons here, so I have to let this next one go because I don't have any shields left. I'm gonna go for another Hydro Cannon. We take their final shield, and I'm able to land the next Hydro Cannon. They live with 1 HP, but then my opponent messes up and they swap into Pangoro. Because they swap, they lose a turn. They're not able to get that Karate Chop damage off, whereas I think if they had stayed in, it might have been a simultaneous KO, but I end up taking that win. Now guys, I am going to move on to the final set that I played that day. On the lead, we saw an amazing lead again of Shadow Dragonite, and again, like all my other opponents, they swap into Feraligatr. I go for that Swift, and now 1 Hydro Cannon along with the Shadow Claw damage should be enough to take this Feraligatr out. I will survive this next Hydro Cannon, so I'm not going to shield it. We take the Feraligatr out. My Clefable is still going to be aligned to their Dragonite, so it's going well, and my opponent's final Pokemon is going to be a Cobalion. I think Clefable can take care of both of my opponent's final Pokemon on its own, but I am going to swap into my Swampert after taking a shield from Cobalion. They have a lot of energy now, unfortunately, so I have to take all these Sacred Swords on Swampert. I probably should have swapped earlier, but I am going to be able to go for a Hydro Cannon here. I recognize that I wasn't going to be able to reach an Earthquake if my opponent was going to go for another Sacred Sword, and I kind of want to take this win with Clefable. I want to save both my shields for it. My opponent swaps out into Dragonite. They take a Moonblast. We take them out, and now I have 2 shields for Clefable up against a Cobalion. I go ahead and double shield even though it's a Sacred Sword bait. A Stone Edge is not going to be that scary for Clefable, and I'm still very healthy, so my opponent lets the Moonblast go, and we take that win. That was completely RPS, but GG's to our opponent. Okay, in this next battle, we are going to see how our team performs against a Tentacruel lead, because we are technically ABA weak to Tentacruel. I swap immediately into my Shadow Feraligatr, and my opponent is staying in. They take a Hydro Cannon, and then they swap into a Guzzlord. I'm actually happy drawing this Guzzlord out here because I have Ice Beam, and that is going to hit for super effective. They let it go. Now they're really low, and I can come in with Clefable and go for a full farm down. They have Sludge Bomb, but it's fine. It doesn't do that much damage. I should be able to farm them down before they can reach another move, and as soon as they bring that Tentacruel back in, I'm going to swap into my Swampert. I decide to shield the Skull because I want to keep my Swampert healthy, and my opponent's final Pokemon is going to be a Malamar. Okay, I have an energy lead. I'm going to be able to reach 2 Hydro Cannons here, but my opponent has 2 shields left. We land the first Hydro Cannon. The second Hydro Cannon takes a shield from my opponent, and I bring in Clefable here. I was really hoping they would shield, so I went for a Swift, but they don't shield, and they bring their Tentacruel back in. I should have just gone for the Moonblast and taken that Malamar out. But I have energy to go for 2 Swifts now up against this Tentacruel. The second one was going to KO, so they went ahead and shielded. And I'm thinking I have to shield the Scald, so I might be able to farm them down completely. have energy ready for their Malamar. They don't have any shields left, and we can go for that Hydro Cannon, take Malamar out, and take that win. GG's to our opponent. Moving on to the next battle, we're going to be up against an Alolan Muck. Now I swap immediately into my Feraligatr. It was running Poison Jab, and my opponent brings out a Poliwrath. This is pretty bad for me because Poliwrath is going to be able to wall our Feraligatr. At least I'm going to be able to land 2 Hydro Cannons and get it pretty low. But here my opponent stops tapping because they don't want me to get a lot of farm on my Clefable, which is smart. I bring Clefable in now, I'm able to farm them down, and they bring that Muck back in, and their final Pokemon is going to be a Shadow Feraligatr. I don't think I can win this because Shadow Feraligatr is going to be able to destroy my Swampert. I'm going to bait with a Hydro Cannon. They go ahead and shield it, and I use my second shield here. I don't know how this is going to play out, but I think I go for an Earthquake here, hoping that my opponent would call a bait, but they shield it, and I need to reach 2 Moonblasts up against this Muck. Yep, a Swift is not going to be enough to take them out. They are able to reach the Sledge Wave before we can reach that Moonblast. They take us out, and at this point, I can't win this because I need energy for Feraligatr, so I'm just going to let this Dark Pulse go on our Swampert, and my opponent is going to take the win there. Moving on to the next battle, this is another good one. We get a Tentacruel lead. I swap immediately into my Feraligatr, and we draw out an Umbreon. This is really terrible, but my opponent lets me get an energy lead, so I might have a chance here. I go for 2 Hydro Cannons. They both land on the Umbreon, and they are in the yellow now. I'm going to let whatever this is go. It's a Dark Pulse, and I reach another Hydro Cannon before my opponent can reach another Dark Pulse. They let it go, and it's enough to take them out. We won Switch with Feraligatr against an Umbreon, and now my Swampert is going to be aligned to their Tentacruel. They even waste their energy here on the Feraligatr. I was really worried that they were going to farm me down, but they don't. Swampert is now up against his Tentacruel. I decide to shield the Skull to keep my Swampert healthy, and I really thought a Hydro Cannon would be enough to take them out, but it's not. They live with 1 HP. They're able to get another Scald off, and I need to save my final shield in case what they have in the back is going to need it. My opponent's final Pokemon is a Golurk, and they let the Hydro Cannon go, and then they top left. I could have reached 2 Hydro Cannons on that Golurk and then come in with Clefable and gone for a Moonblast. So either way, I think I would have still won that. GG's to our opponent. Guys, we have reached the final battle of the video. If you've watched this far, let me know. But on the lead, we see a Cobalion. We managed to land a Moonblast on them, but then they swap into their own Clefable. They shield their Clefable, and then they go for a Moonblast of their own. They are not going to let me reach another Moonblast, so they go ahead and take us out with a Swift. Unfortunately, it's enough to KO, and their Clefable is still healthy here, which means it is going to be a little bit tricky to deal with, but I come in with Feraligatr, go for a Hydro Cannon. It's not quite enough to take them out. They go for a Moonblast, I go ahead and shield, and this Cobalion has a lot of energy. I am going to be able to reach a Hydro Cannon on the Cobalion and take another shield from my opponent. They have no shields left, and I don't want to give up my final shield, so I swap into Swampert to take the 2 Sacred Swords that they are going to throw, and we live in the yellow, but I am going to farm up before throwing that Hydro Cannon. Hopefully this energy is going to be useful for whatever they have in the back. They have a Feraligatr. I think they tried to catch a move from my Swampert, but I kept farming. We farmed down their Clefable. We were going to be able to hit an Earthquake on their Feraligatr, and my opponent goes ahead and top left. Good games to our opponent, and we are going to end the day off with a 4-1, taking us back into the high 2,300s. And that is going to be the end of our video. Thank you so much for watching. If you guys like my content, please consider subscribing, maybe leave a like. It helps me out so much. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.